Most people wait until the body is cold to start the war for inheritance. But my son Reed could not even wait for the casket to drop. I watched him check his watch, eyes full of calculation. When I got home, my key would not turn. He had changed the locks. He thought he had won. But he did not know about the $6 million fund the banker had just frozen on my behalf. My name is Mara Ellington. At 54 years old, I had spent the last 2 decades analyzing risk and predicting market crashes at the Northbrook Ledger Institute. I knew how to spot a bad investment from a mile away. Standing there on the damp grass, watching the mahogany casket lower into the ground, I realized my biggest liability was standing right next to me. The funeral was elegant, expensive, and completely devoid of warmth. The flowers were too perfect, the eulogies too rehearsed. My husband, Gail Ellington, deserved better than this performative grief, but he was gone, and I was left alone in a sea of black coats and shark-like smiles. My son, Reed, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He checked his watch twice during the prayer. As soon as the priest stepped back, signaling the end of the service, Reed turned to me. He did not hug me. He did not ask how I was holding up. "Mother," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to meet with the estate attorney tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. I want to get ahead of the probate process." I adjusted my sunglasses to hide the disgust in my eyes. "Your father has been in the ground for less than 2 minutes. Reed, can this not wait? It is complicated." Mara, Helene, his wife, chimed in. She placed a hand on my arm, her fingers feeling more like talons than comfort. "We just want to make sure you are protected. Gail's assets are complex." I looked at Helene. Her eyes were not red from crying. They were darting around, landing on the diamond brooch on my lapel, then shifting to the vintage car waiting to take us home. It was a look I had seen 1,000 times in boardrooms, the look of a predator assessing the kill. "I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs," I said, my voice steady. "I did manage half the portfolios in the city before I retired. Remember?" Reed sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "That was a long time ago. Mum, things have changed." I turned away from them, needing a moment of air. That was when I saw him. Standing near the edge of the cemetery, half obscured by a large oak tree, was a man I did not recognize. He wore a trench coat that looked lived in, not like the pristine designer wool everyone else was wearing. He was looking directly at me. He held my gaze for a heartbeat, his expression unreadable. And then he turned and vanished into the fog. A shiver went down my spine. Who was he? Gail had many friends, but I knew them all. I walked toward the car, intending to leave, when I heard Reed's voice carried by the wind. He was speaking into his phone, turned away from the crowd. "Yes, right now," Reed whispered into the receiver. "She is still at the cemetery. Just get it done before she gets back." My stomach churned. I froze, pretending to adjust my shoe. "Reed, keep your voice down," Helene hissed, stepping up beside him. "Don't worry," Reed replied, snapping his phone shut. "The locksmith is already there." The locksmith. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. I felt a sudden rush of vertigo. My relationship with Reed had been strained for years, fractured by his constant demands for money and my refusal to enable his lavish lifestyle. But I never thought he would stoop this low. My phone buzzed in my clutch purse. I pulled it out. my hands trembling slightly. It was a text message from a blocked number. Don't let them touch Gail's safe. I stared at the screen. The air in my lungs felt suddenly too thin. I looked around for the stranger in the coat, but the cemetery was empty, save for the workers beginning to fill the grave. Mom Reed called out, his mask of concern back in place. Are you coming? We should get you home to rest. Yes, I said, slipping the phone into my pocket. I am coming. The ride home was suffocating. I stared out the window, the text message burning in my mind. When the car finally pulled into the driveway of the house Gail and I had shared for 30 years, Reed and Helene did not get out. They idled in the driveway, watching me. I walked to the front door, the heavy wood looking formidable in the grey light. I retrieved my keyring. I selected the brass key I had used every day for 3 decades. I slid it into the lock. It stopped halfway. I frowned and pushed harder. It would not go in. I pulled it out and tried again, jiggling the handle. Nothing. The lock was shiny, brand new, and completely unyielding. I turned around to look at the car. Reed was watching me through the tinted window. He did not look away. He simply put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway, leaving me standing on my own porch, locked out of the life I had built. I stood on the porch, the cold wind biting through my funeral dress, staring at the brass hardware that denied me entry to my own home. It was almost laughable. Reed thought a lock could stop me. I had spent 30 years unlocking problems far more complex than a deadbolt. My mind drifted back to the financial crisis 15 years ago. Gail's manufacturing business had been bleeding cash, his ledgers a sea of red ink. He had sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, ready to declare bankruptcy. I was the one who took the pen from his shaking fingers. I was the one who restructured the debt, liquidated the non-performing assets, and negotiated with the creditors until 3 a.m. I saved the Ellington legacy, not Gail. It was during that time that Gail first mentioned the safety net. He had looked at me, eyes bloodshot, and lowered his voice even though we were alone. I have a contingency fund. Mara, he had whispered. Money that is off the books, just in case the world burns down again. But no one touches it. Not even you. It is the nuclear option. I had dismissed it as paranoia back then. But now, shivering on my doorstep, I wondered if he had foreseen this very moment. Reed never understood the value of $1 because he never had to earn one. Our relationship had soured precisely because I refused to be his personal ATM. He saw my prudence as control. Helene fueled that fire. Of course. I remembered a dinner party last Christmas. Helene had looked at my sensible sedan parked next to her leased luxury SUV and smirked over her wineglass. You know, Mara, she had said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. There is no prize for dying with the most money in the bank. You really do not know how to live comfortably. Do you? But the real break happened 2 years ago. Reed had come to me, sweating and manic, asking for a loan of $500,000 for a tech investment. I reviewed the prospectus. It was a Ponzi scheme wrapped in buzzwords. I refused. You are ruining my life, Reed had screamed, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. You sit on this pile of gold like a dragon while I try to build something Dad would have given it to me. Your father would have laughed you out of the room. I had replied calmly. From that day on, the hatred in Reed's eyes had hardened into something permanent. I pulled my phone out and dialed a local locksmith. I needed to get inside. When the van arrived 20 minutes later, the young man in blue coveralls hopped out, clipboards in hand. He walked up the driveway, but as he got closer, he slowed down. He looked at me, then looked at a note on his clipboard. "Mrs. Ellington?" he asked, keeping his distance. "Yes," I said, reaching for my ID. "I have locked myself out. I can show you my license." He took a step back, shaking his head. "I cannot do that, ma'am. The owner of the property, a Mr. Reed Ellington, called our dispatch an hour ago. He said he just changed the locks because—" The man paused, looking uncomfortable. "Because what I demanded, he said his mother has significant memory issues," the locksmith stammered, avoiding my eyes. "He said you might try to break in, that you get confused about where you live. He said if anyone changes the locks for you, they are aiding a mentally incompetent person. I could lose my license." My blood turned to ice. It was not just a lock. It was a narrative. Reed was building a case for my incompetence. He was painting me as a senile old woman who could not be trusted. "I see," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You may leave." The locksmith practically ran back to his van. I sat down on the porch swing, the wood groaning under my weight. I thought about Gail. In the last few years, we had become strangers sharing a roof. We slept in separate rooms. We spoke only about schedules and dinner. He had been secretive, guarding his home office like a fortress. But I remembered something. A few months ago, I had seen a letter on his desk before he snatched it away. It had a logo I did not recognize, a small, provincial bank called First Wintersburg Savings. It was 2 states away. Why would a man with accounts in New York and Switzerland bank in a tiny town in Ohio? Don't let them touch Gail's safe. The text message echoed in my head. Reed thought he had locked me out. He thought he had cut off my supply. But he forgot that I was the one who taught him how to count. If Gail had a secret fund in Wintersburg, I was going to find it. And I was going to use every cent of it to burn their little plan to the ground. Wintersburg was a ghost town, disguised as a municipality. A place where time seemed to have stalled somewhere in the late 90s. I parked my rental car in front of First Wintersburg Savings. It was a modest brick building that looked nothing like the glass towers Gail usually favoured. I smoothed my skirt, took a deep breath, and pushed through the heavy glass doors. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. I approached the manager's desk, where the nameplate read, Arthur Medford. He was a man in his 60s with thinning grey hair and a face etched with the kind of weariness that comes from handling other people's money for too long. "Mr. Medford," I asked, keeping my voice firm. "I am Mara Ellington, Gail Ellington's wife." Arthur looked up, and for a split second, I saw recognition flash in his eyes. Then, a mask of professional indifference slammed down. He stood up, but he did not offer his hand. "Mrs. Ellington," he said. His tone clipped. "I was wondering if you would come. However, I am afraid I cannot discuss any accounts with you. Excuse me." I gripped the edge of his desk. "I am his widow. I am the executor of his estate." Arthur shuffled some papers, refusing to meet my gaze. "According to the documentation we received yesterday from the primary heir, your son, Mr. Reed Ellington, there are restrictions." He cleared his throat, looking genuinely pained. "The filing claims that due to your rapid cognitive decline, you are not mentally fit to manage financial assets. until the probate court rules otherwise. I cannot release information to you. The room seemed to tilt. Reed had moved faster than I could have imagined. He was not just stealing the money, he was erasing my identity. That is a lie, I whispered, my voice trembling with rage. I am perfectly sane. I have my orders. Mrs. Ellington, Arthur said loudly. For the benefit of the tellers watching us, please leave. But as he pointed toward the door, he slid a small, yellow, sticky note across the mahogany surface of the desk, hidden beneath his palm. He lifted his hand for a fraction of a second. I looked down. In scrawled ink, it read, "Side door." After 5, I nodded imperceptibly and turned on my heel, walking out with my head high. I spent the next 3 hours sitting in a diner across the street, watching the bank like a hawk, nursing a single cup of black coffee until it went cold. At 5 minutes past 5, the lights in the bank went out. I walked around to the alleyway entrance. The metal door creaked open, and Arthur stood there, beckoning me inside. "I am sorry about the theatre out there," Arthur said, locking the door behind me. His demeanor had completely changed. The stiffness was gone, replaced by a grim urgency. Gail and we were friends. Mara, close friends. We served in the military together 40 years ago. He trusted me when he couldn't trust anyone in his own house. He led me to his office and pulled a bottle of bourbon from a drawer, pouring 2 glasses. Gail knew this was coming, Arthur said, taking a heavy swig. He set up a blind trust here 5 years ago. He deposited $6 million. He told me it was to protect the most important person in his life. I always assumed he meant Reed. Arthur looked at me with sad eyes. I was wrong. "Reed knows about it?" I asked. "He found out 3 days ago." Arthur replied. "He called me, demanding access. He said he was the only competent survivor. He had the paperwork ready. Mara. He had doctor's notes, legal affidavits, everything prepared before Gail's body was even cold. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bank's air conditioning. He planned this. "That is why I froze the fund," Arthur said. "I flagged it for suspicious activity to buy you time, but I cannot hold it forever. If Reed gets a court order, he will drain this account dry." "Why would Gail hide this here?" I asked. "Why not tell me Arthur opened a safe behind his desk and pulled out a thin manila folder? Because he was afraid. Not just of losing the money." He slid the folder across the desk. He was afraid for his life. I opened the file. It was empty, save for a single sheet of plain white paper. On it, typed in Gail's familiar, heavy-handed style, was one sentence. "If I am gone, find the keeper of my old phone." I stared at the words. My heart hammered against my ribs. "He gave me this instructions a month ago," Arthur said quietly. He looked terrified. "Mara. He told me. If I die suddenly, give this to Mara. Only Mara." I looked up at Arthur. A month ago. But his heart attack was sudden. "Was it?" Arthur asked. "Reed was here, in my office, asking about liquidation procedures the week before Gail died. Does that sound like a grieving son to you?" I clutched the paper. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Reed was not just greedy, he was methodical. And if he had prepared the legal destruction of my sanity before Gail died, then Gail's death was not an accident. It was the first step in a business plan. "I need to find that phone," I said, my voice steel. "Be careful." "Mara," Arthur warned. "If Reed knows you are here, if he knows you are looking, let him come." I said, standing up. He thinks I am a confused old woman. I am going to show him exactly how sharp my memory is. The drive back from Wintersburg was a blur of highway markers and racing thoughts. Find the keeper of my old phone. The phrase looped in my mind until it clicked into place like a puzzle piece. I remembered a Sunday dinner 3 months ago. Reed had been cleaning out the study, holding up a cracked, outdated smartphone with disgust. He had called it garbage. Gale had snatched it out of his hand with a ferocity that startled us all, shouting that some things were not meant to be thrown away. Gale had hidden it. But where I knew exactly where Reed put things, he considered trash, but was too lazy to drive to the dump. I waited until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I knew Reed was at the lawyer's office trying to expedite his claim on the estate, and Helene never missed her Tuesday Pilates class. I pulled up to their house, a sterile, modern mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. I punched the code into the garage keypad. 1, 9, 8, 0. Reed's birth year. He was predictable in his narcissism. The garage was filled with boxes labelled Dad's junk. I tore through them, my manicured nails breaking against the cardboard. Dust filled the air, choking me. But I did not stop. Finally, in a plastic bin shoved behind a set of golf clubs, I found it. The screen was shattered, a spiderweb of glass over the black display. I ran back to my car and plugged it into the charger. I held my breath. For 5 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then, the battery icon flashed red. When it finally powered on, I bypassed the swipe lock. Gale never used passwords for his personal devices. There were no photos, no messages. Just a single note in the memo app. It was a list of 4 names: Janice O'Rourke, Margaret Vane, Eleanor Hamsley, Sarah Fitch. I recognized the names. They were women who had worked as secretaries and assistants for Gale in the early 90s. I put the car in gear. I had to know why my husband was keeping a list of his former female employees. I found Janice O'Rourke living in a small, tidy duplex on the south side of the city. She was older now, her hair white, but her eyes were sharp. She hesitated when I told her who I was, but she let me in. I have not seen Gale in 10 years, Janice said, setting a cup of tea in front of me. Her hands trembled slightly. But he sent me a check every month. $500. He called it a penance. A penance for what I asked. Janice looked down at her lap. For watching. Back at the firm, when the new management came in, they fired all the older women first, said we were obsolete. Gale, he could not stop them. He watched us get walked out by security like criminals. He told me once, "I never want to see a woman stripped of her dignity again just because she has grey hair." I thanked her and drove to the address I found for Margaret Vane. It was a nursing home, the kind that smelled of bleach and despair. The receptionist shook her head when I asked for her. "Mrs. Vane passed away last winter," the receptionist said, tapping on her keyboard. "It was sad. Her file says, abandoned by family. Her son stopped paying the bills, stopped visiting. She died alone in a state ward." I walked out of the nursing home, the sunlight feeling harsh and blinding. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The pieces fell into place with a terrifying clarity. The $6 million, the secrecy, the list. Gale had not just been hiding money. He had been building a fortress. He had watched these women loyal, hard-working women be discarded by their employers and their families the moment they were perceived as a burden. He saw Margaret Vane abandoned by her son, and he looked at Reed, and he saw the same cruelty. My husband did not trust our son to take care of me. He knew that the moment he died, Reed would view me not as his mother, but as a liability to be liquidated. I looked at the cracked phone in my hand. "Oh, Gail," I whispered, tears finally spilling over. You knew he would come for me." My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my grief. It was a notification from my home security system, the one Reed thought he had locked me out of. I had a second admin account he didn't know about. The camera feed loaded. I saw men in suits walking through my living room. They were tagging my furniture with stickers. They were inventorying my life for an estate sale. I wiped my face. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Gail had prepared the weapon. Now, I was going to pull the trigger. I sat in the sterile silence of a hotel room, the only sanctuary I could find, and opened my laptop. Reed had underestimated one critical thing. I knew all his passwords. He used the same variation of his high school football jersey number for everything. I logged into the county court portal, and my heart hammered against my ribs as the search results populated. There it was. A filing dated 2 days ago. Petition for emergency conservatorship over Mara Ellington. He was not just trying to take the house. He was trying to take my life. He wanted the legal authority to decide where I lived, what I ate, and when I could spend a dime. I scrolled further and found an invoice from a law firm, dated 6 months ago. The subject line made my blood run cold. Strategy for maternal incapacitation. They had been planning to bury me while I was still setting the table for Sunday dinner. I logged into the family cloud account that Helene, in her arrogance, had never bothered to secure. I found a wire transfer request initiated yesterday. $50,000 moving from a joint account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Helene was not grieving. She was looting the ship before it even fully sank. My phone rang, shattering the tension. It was Arthur. "Mara," he said, his voice tight. I just had a process server in my lobby. Reed's lawyers are serving the bank with a demand to unfreeze the $6 million fund immediately. They are claiming you manipulated Gail into creating it while he was mentally compromised. "Hold the line." "Arthur," I said, gripping the phone. "Do not let them break that seal. I can only stall them for 48 hours. Arthur replied. "They are aggressive. They are acting like they are running out of time." I hung up and looked back at my tablet. I pulled up the home security feed again, the one I had accessed earlier. I switched camera views, cycling through the living room, the kitchen, the hallway. Then I saw it. A view I did not recognize. It was a high angle, looking down at the master bedroom, Gail's room. I had never installed a camera there. I zoomed in on the feed. The timestamp showed it had been active for months. Reed had been watching us. He had been watching his father die. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. 2 weeks before the end. Gail had gripped my hand at breakfast. His skin was grey, his breathing laboured. "Mara," he had whispered, looking over his shoulder as if the walls had ears. "Don't let them make you disappear. They look at me, and they do not see a father. They see a machine that has stopped printing money." I had brushed it off as the rambling of a sick man. Now, looking at the hidden camera feed, I realized it was a warning. I opened the folder of scanned documents I had downloaded from Reed's cloud. I found a copy of Gail's death certificate. Cause of death: sudden cardiac arrest. It was signed by a doctor I did not know. not our family physician. Then, I found an email in Helene's sent folder. It was addressed to an insurance adjuster. Subject policy 844-902 claim. Please expedite the payout. As discussed, the autopsy was waived per the family's request to respect the deceased. We expect the $5 million settlement by Friday. I stopped breathing. $5 million. Gail had a history of high blood pressure. Yes. But he was medicated. He was stable. Sudden cardiac arrest. No autopsy and a life insurance policy that paid out double for accidental or sudden death. They had watched him on that camera. They saw him getting weaker. And when he didn't die fast enough for their debts to be paid, they must have done something to speed it along. My hands were not trembling anymore. I felt a cold, dark clarity settle over me. Reed and Helene were not just thieves. They were monsters. And I was the only witness left alive. The rain hammered against the window of my hotel room, matching the chaotic rhythm of my thoughts. I needed medical answers. But the front door was closed, so I had to find a window. I dialed Dr. Evans, the cardiologist who had treated Gail for 10 years. I am sorry. Mrs. Ellington. Dr. Evans said, his voice clipped and professional. The medical records are currently sealed, pending the probate review initiated by your son. I cannot discuss the details of Gail's treatment with you. It is a legal matter now. He hung up before I could protest. Reed had gotten to him. I did not give up. I remembered Brenda, the head nurse at the practice who had retired 2 months ago. Gail had sent her a fruit basket. I found her number in Gail's old contacts and asked her to meet me at a diner on the edge of town. She looked nervous, stirring her coffee continuously. I checked the logs before I left. Mara, Brenda whispered, leaning across the sticky table. 3 weeks before he passed. There was a change in his prescription. His beta blocker dosage was doubled, and they added a diuretic. I felt a cold hand squeeze my heart. Doubled, but his blood pressure was stable. I know, Brenda said, her eyes filling with tears. I asked the new doctor about it, but he said the family requested a more aggressive approach to prevent future issues. The notes said the patient complained of chest pain, but Gail never complained. Who picked up the prescription? Brenda, I asked, dreading the answer. She took a shaky breath. Reed. It was always Reed. He insisted on handling it personally because he said you were getting too confused to manage the pill organizer. I sat back. The vinyl booth creaking. They had drugged him. They had increased his medication to induce the very heart failure they claimed killed him. My phone buzzed. It was Arthur. I found something, Arthur said without preamble. I went through the security footage from the bank lobby. 3 days before Gail died. Reed came in. He did not meet with me. He met with a junior loan officer. What did he want? I asked. He was trying to leverage the house against a business loan. Arthur explained. The audio on the camera is faint, but I enhanced it. Mara, you need to hear this. He played the clip. Through the static. Reed's voice cut through like a knife. Look, you can approve this pending the title transfer, Reed's voice said, sounding arrogant and impatient. My father won't be around much longer. We need to prepare for the liquidity event. It is imminent. Imminent, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. He knew exactly when Gail was going to die. I hung up and went back to my laptop. I had access to the shared family cloud, but I needed to go deeper. I guessed Helene's password. It was the name of her first show dog, followed by the year she won a ribbon, Princess 2004. I scrolled through her deleted items. There, buried under spam emails, was a receipt from an online pharmacy based in Canada. It was dated 1 month ago. Order summary digoxin. High potency. Expedited shipping. Digoxin was for heart failure, but in high doses, it could stop a heart completely. And Gail was not prescribed digoxin. I felt sick. I ran to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, staring at the woman in the mirror. I did not look like a victim anymore. I looked like an avenging angel. I went back to the computer. I found one last file in a folder Reed had labeled Legal Prep. It was a video recording of a Zoom call with his lawyer. I clicked play. Reed was sitting in his home office, sipping a scotch. The timing has to be perfect. Reed said to the camera, "We need the death certificate filed before the bank realizes there is a secondary claim on the assets. And Mom. The sooner Mom is incapacitated, the better. If she starts digging into the accounts, well, we cannot let that happen." "Is she a threat?" the lawyer's voice asked from the speakers. "She is old." Reed sneered, a look of pure malice on his face. "She is emotional. Once I have the conservatorship, I will put her in a home. She won't be able to access the $6 million fund or the house. We take it all." I closed the laptop. The silence in the room was deafening. They had murdered my husband for money. And now, they were coming for me. But they had made a fatal error. They thought I was a senile old woman who would go quietly into the night. I picked up the phone and dialed Arthur. "Get the papers ready," I told him, my voice steady and cold. "I am not just fighting for the money anymore. I am fighting for justice." I walked into Arthur's private office, the smell of old paper and anxiety hanging in the air. Arthur was pacing, but the woman sitting in the leather chair was perfectly still. She wore a tailored crimson suit that screamed aggression, and her eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. "Mara," Arthur said, stopping his pacing. "This is Delilah Crane. She is the best estate litigator in the state. She eats sharks for breakfast." Delilah didn't smile. She extended a hand, her grip firm. "Arthur tells me your son is trying to bury you. Mrs. Ellington. I specialize in digging people out. He is not just trying to bury me," I said, sitting down and placing the file of evidence on the desk. "He killed my husband. I know it." Delilah flipped through the printed emails and the transcript of the video I had found. She didn't gasp. She didn't flinch. She just nodded. A predator recognizing the scent of blood. "We have enough to start a war," Delilah said, her voice smooth and low. "But we need the kill shot. If we move too fast, he will destroy evidence. We need to freeze him out completely before we strike." "What do?" I asked. "Go back to the house," Delilah commanded. "I have already filed an emergency injunction. The judge signed it 20 minutes ago. You have legal possession of the property again. Go home. Act like you won a small victory. Let him think you are just a stubborn old woman clinging to her furniture. While he is distracted by that, I will file the asset freeze on everything else." I did exactly as she said. I returned to my home with a court order in hand. The locksmith Arthur hired let me back in. The house felt violated, stripped of Gail's warmth. But it was mine again. I spent the afternoon in the study Reed's temporary command center. He had been arrogant enough to leave his physical files on the desk, assuming I would never get back inside. I photographed every document bank transfers, emails printed out, and notes on liquidating assets. But I was not the only one watching. As I peered through the blinds, I saw a grey sedan parked down the street. It had been there since I left the hotel. Helene. She was too cowardly to do the dirty work herself, so she had hired eyes. My phone rang. It was Arthur. Mara, he said, his voice urgent. Someone is trying to brute force the security on the $6 million fund. They are using a hacking algorithm. It is clumsy, but persistent. It is Reed, I said, watching the grey car outside. He is desperate. Not for long. Delilah's voice chimed in. She was on the line. I just dropped the hammer. The temporary restraining order on the assets is live. Reed cannot withdraw a penny from any account associated with the Ellington name, not even his own allowance. The reaction was immediate. Less than 20 minutes later, Reed's sports car screeched into the driveway. He didn't park. He abandoned the vehicle and stormed up the steps. He pounded on the door, the wood shaking under his fists. "Open this door," he screamed. "Open it now, or I will break it down." I stood on the other side, my hand gripping my phone, the voice recorder running. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. Reed stood there, his face twisted into a mask of pure hate. He looked so much like his father, yet nothing like him at all. "You—" he snarled, stepping into the foyer, his chest heaving. "You froze my accounts. Do you have any idea what you have done? I have investors waiting. I have deals. Get out of my house." "Reed," I said calmly. "Your house." He laughed, a manic, broken sound. "You are a guest here. You are a liability. I should have put you in a home the day Dad died. I should have—" He stopped, realizing he was saying too much, but his rage pushed him forward. "You think you are clever. You are nothing. You are a ghost. Mother. And ghosts need to know when to fade away." "Is that a threat?" I asked, holding the phone clearly in view. Reed looked at the phone, then back at me. His eyes went cold. "It is a promise. You want to play games? Fine. But remember, accidents happen to old ladies living alone all the time." He turned and stormed out, kicking a planter off the porch as he left. I locked the door, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I sent the recording to Delilah immediately. That night, the house was silent. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, clutching a heavy brass candlestick I had taken from the mantel. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard it. The distinct sound of glass shattering in the kitchen. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Heavy boots on the hardwood floor. I didn't hide under the covers. I got up. I walked to the top of the stairs and flipped the master switch that controlled the foyer chandelier. Light flooded the hallway below. A figure dressed in black stood at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up, blinded by the sudden brilliance. He saw me standing there, not cowering, but waiting. He saw the brass weapon in my hand. He hesitated. "Get out!" I screamed, my voice echoing through the empty house. The intruder scrambled back, slipping on the rug, and bolted out the back door. I stood there, shaking, realizing the war had moved from the courtroom to my living room. They were not just trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to finish what they started with Gail. But they had forgotten one thing. I was still the woman who saved this family from ruin once, and I would burn it all down before I let them win. The war room was no longer my kitchen table. It was Delilah's sleek, glass-walled office downtown. The city bustled below us, oblivious to the fact that a family was tearing itself apart just 40 floors up. Delilah threw a stack of papers onto the conference table with a satisfying thud. "I got him," Delilah said, her eyes gleaming with predatory delight. Or rather, I got her. Helene made a mistake. She was careful with the big transfers, but she got lazy with the small ones. "What did you find?" I asked, leaning forward. "A wire transfer for $10,000, Delilah explained, pointing to a highlighted line. "Sent 2 days before Gail died. The recipient is a Dr. Marcus Aris. Does the name ring a bell?" I shook my head. "Gail's cardiologist was Dr. Evans." "Exactly," Delilah said. "But Dr. Aris is the one who signed the death certificate. And guess who was Helene's sorority sister in college, Dr. Aris's wife? They bought a doctor, Mara. They paid him to look the other way and sign off on a natural causes death without an autopsy." My stomach churned. But before I could process the horror, my phone buzzed. It was Arthur. He did not sound like the composed banker I knew. He sounded out of breath. "Mara, check your email," Arthur said urgently. "I just sent you an audio file. And I found the original trust deed for the $6 million fund." "What does it say?" "It is explicit," Arthur said. "It says, 'To be administered solely by Mara Ellington for her protection and charitable works.' Reed's name is nowhere on it. He lied to the probate court. But that is not the worst part. Reed was just here." "He came to the bank?" I asked, gripping the phone. "He came to my office," Arthur corrected. "He bypassed security. Listen to the recording." I pressed play on the file Arthur had sent. Reed's voice filled the room, cold and menacing. "You are a relic." "Arthur," Reed's voice sneered from the speaker. "And you know what happens to relics that stand in the way of progress. They get smashed. You need to disappear. Retire. Go to Florida. Because if you keep digging up old papers, you might find yourself in an accident. Is that a threat?" Son Arthur's voice on the recording was calm, but shaky. "It is financial advice," Reed replied. "Walk away while you can still walk." The recording ended. Delilah looked at me, her expression grim. "That is witness intimidation. We can use that." "There is more," Arthur said, his voice coming back through the phone. "Gail knew they might try to freeze you out. He opened a shadow account. It is under your maiden name. He deposited $1,200,000 into it 6 months ago. It is completely separate from the estate. Reed does not know it exists. $1,200,000. Gail had given me a war chest. I hung up and turned to my laptop. I had set up an alert for any new legal filings involving my name. A notification popped up. I opened the document, and my blood ran cold. It was a draft affidavit prepared by Reed's lawyers. It was titled, "Evidence of Early-Stage Dementia and Cognitive Decline." I read the lies. Subject forgets the names of close family members. Subject often gets lost in her own neighborhood. Subject has become paranoid and aggressive. He was rewriting my reality. He was planning to have me committed. I heard the mail slot clatter at home. I was monitoring the security feed on my tablet. I rewound the footage. A courier had just dropped off a heavy cream envelope. I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, to retrieve it and send me a picture of the contents. 10 minutes later, the image arrived on my phone. It was a sympathy card, the front covered in tasteful lilies. Inside, in Helene's jagged handwriting, was a message that had nothing to do with sympathy. Grief is exhausting. Old people should know when to be quiet and rest. Do not make this harder than it has to be. I stared at the screen, fury replacing fear. They thought I was weak. They thought I was alone. Then, a final notification chimed. It was from an unknown number, no text, just an image. It was a photograph taken on a cell phone, blurry and hasty. It showed Reed sitting in a conference room I recognized the bank's private lending suite. He was signing a thick stack of documents, but it was the date stamp on the digital clock on the wall that mattered. It was dated the day before Gail died. I zoomed in on the document Reed was signing. The header was visible. Transfer of power of attorney, effective upon incapacitation. He signed it early. I whispered, showing the phone to Delilah. He took control of the company 24 hours before Gail's heart stopped. He knew exactly when Gail was going to die because they had already scheduled it. Delilah stood up, buttoning her jacket. We have the motive. We have the method. We have the cover-up. We just need one thing. We need to prove he administered the drugs. I know how to get that, I said, standing up to join her. We are going to court. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B closed with a finality that echoed in my chest. This was not a criminal trial. Not yet. But the air was thick with the kind of tension usually reserved for capital cases. Delilah had pulled every lever she had to get this emergency hearing, citing imminent dissipation of assets and elder abuse. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded calmly on the polished wood. Across the aisle, Reed and Helene sat with their high-priced legal team. Reed looked impeccable in his charcoal suit, but I could see the tightness in his jaw, the way he aggressively tapped his pen against the table. Helene wore a modest beige dress, a calculated choice to make her look harmless and maternal. All rise, the bailiff announced. Judge Halloway took the bench. She was a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked at the crowded motion papers before her and then peered over her glasses at us. We are here to address the emergency injunction regarding the estate of Gail Ellington, Judge Halloway said, her voice dry, and the cross motion regarding the competency of Mrs. Mara Ellington. Delilah stood up. Your Honor, we intend to prove that not only is my client perfectly competent, but she is also the victim of a systematic conspiracy to strip her of her assets and her dignity. Objection. Reed's lawyer shot up. This is theatre. Mrs. Ellington is suffering from grief-induced paranoia. I would like to speak, I said, my voice cutting through the legal jargon. I did not wait for permission. I stood up. The judge looked at me, surprised by my breach of protocol, but she nodded. Go ahead, Mrs. Ellington. I turned to look directly at Reed. He refused to meet my eyes. My son claims I am losing my mind, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. He claims I forget names. He claims I get lost. But I remember everything. I remember the day he was born. I remember the day he asked me for money to cover his gambling debts 10 years ago. And I remember the look on his face at my husband's funeral. A look not of sorrow, but of calculation. Reed scoffed, loud enough for the microphone to catch. She is delusional. This is exactly what I was talking about. She is rewriting history to fit her narrative. Helene chimed in, pulling a tissue from her purse and dabbing at dry eyes. Your Honor, please. We love Mara. It breaks my heart to see her like this. We just want to make sure she is safe. She lives alone in that big house. She imagines things. We are just trying to help her. By emptying her bank accounts, Delilah asked sharply. By managing them, Reed snapped. Before she gives it all away to scammers, Delilah gestured to the back of the room. I call Arthur Medford to the stand. Reed stiffened. He had not expected Arthur to be here. Arthur walked to the witness stand, his back straight. He swore the oath and sat down. Mr. Medford, Delilah began. Can you explain the nature of the assets in question? Yes, Arthur said, his voice projecting clearly. Gail Ellington established a blind trust 5 years ago. It contains $6 million. The terms are explicit. The funds are for the sole use of Mara Ellington. Reed Ellington has no claim to it, and has the defendant tried to access it? Repeatedly, Arthur said, glaring at Reed. He presented false documents, claiming his mother was incapacitated. When I refused, he threatened me. Lies, Reed shouted, standing up. The man is senile. He and my father were drinking buddies. He is covering for her. Judge Halloway banged her gavel. Sit down. Mr. Ellington. Now. Show me the proof, the judge demanded, looking at Delilah. Accusations are not evidence. Delilah smiled, a cold, sharp expression. I am glad you asked. Your Honor? She plugged her laptop into the court's audio system. We have a recording from the day Reed Ellington went to Mr. Medford's office. But we also have this. She played the file from my phone, the recording of Reed standing on my porch, screaming through the door. The courtroom filled with the sound of Reed's rage. You are a ghost, Mother, and ghosts need to know when to fade away. Accidents happen to old ladies living alone all the time. The silence that followed was deafening. The stenographer stopped typing. The judge's face went hard as stone. Reed's face drained of colour. He looked around the room, realizing the walls were closing in. He stood up again, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. That was taken out of context. Reed stammered, his voice rising in pitch. I was angry. She locked me out of my own inheritance. I did not mean. I would never. Sit down. Mr. Ellington, the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. Or I will have you removed. Reed sank back into his chair, but his eyes were wild. He looked at Helene, but she had physically distanced herself from him on the bench, staring straight ahead. The fake tears gone. This establishes intent to harm, Delilah said, closing her laptop. But we have more. We know why they were in such a hurry. We know why they needed Mara Ellington silenced. Delilah reached into her briefcase and pulled out a heavy, sealed envelope. She held it up like a weapon. We have the pharmacy records, Delilah announced, her voice ringing through the silent room. And we have the GPS data from your car. Mr. Ellington, on the night your father died. Reed stopped breathing. He stared at the envelope, his hands gripping the table so hard his knuckles turned white. He knew what was inside. We all did. The game was over. But Delilah was about to deliver the final blow. Delilah did not just open the envelope, she detonated it. She pulled out a tablet and connected it to the main display. A grainy video feed appeared. It was not from a security camera, but a screen recording from a laptop. It showed a cursor hovering over a checkout button on an illicit pharmacy website. This digital footprint was recovered from Helene Ellington's personal laptop, Delilah stated, her voice slicing through the air. The date is October 14th. The item is liquid digoxin, and the shipping address is a P.O. box registered to Reed Ellington. Helene gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at Reed, her eyes wide with panic. "That proves nothing," Reed shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "My father had a heart condition. I was buying supplements." "Supplements?" Delilah asked, raising an eyebrow. She clicked the next slide. It was a map with a red line tracing a route. "This is the GPS data from your vehicle." Reed, "On the night Gail died, you claimed you were at a dinner party, but your car was parked in your father's driveway at 8 o'clock at night, exactly 40 minutes before he went into cardiac arrest." The courtroom was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Reed looked like a trapped animal. "And finally," Delilah said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream, "we have the toxicology report from the hair sample preserved by the mortician, a precaution Gail requested in his final instructions to Arthur. It shows levels of digoxin 4 times the lethal limit." Reed slammed his fists onto the table, standing up so abruptly his chair clattered backward. "It was mercy," Reed screamed, his face twisted and red. He was weak. He was pathetic. I just wanted him to sleep. We needed the money, and he was just sitting on it. He was useless." The confession hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Helene stood up, grabbing her purse. "I did not know," she stammered, backing away from Reed. "I had nothing to do with this. He told me it was legal. I have to go to pick up my kids." She tried to bolt for the double doors, her heels clicking frantically on the floor, but 2 bailiffs stepped in her path, blocking her exit. Judge Halloway banged her gavel, the sound like a gunshot. "Order," the judge commanded. She looked at Reed with pure disgust. "Mr. Ellington, you have just admitted to a felony in my courtroom. I am stripping you of any legal standing regarding this estate. You are unfit to manage a lemonade stand, let alone a fortune." She turned to the bailiffs. "Take them into custody. I am referring this matter to the district attorney for immediate criminal investigation regarding the death of Gail Ellington." Reed was still shouting as they handcuffed him, blathering about his rights and his inheritance. Helene was weeping, but her tears were for herself, not for the man she had helped kill. I watched them go. I felt Arthur's hand on my shoulder. "It is over, Mara," Arthur said softly. "The judge ruled that the $6 million fund would be transferred immediately to my control, to be used exactly as Gail had intended for my protection and for the charitable causes we had always supported." I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. For the first time in months, I did not need to hold on to the railing. My back was straight. The fear that had been my constant companion was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet strength. I drove home alone. The house was empty, but it no longer felt haunted. It felt reclaimed. I sat in the living room, in Gail's favourite armchair. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I held the bank confirmation paper in my hands. $6 million. It was not just money. It was Gail's final act of love. He knew he could not save himself, so he made sure he saved me. I looked at the empty space where he used to sit. Finally, "Gail," I whispered, clutching the paper to my chest. "I am safe. You were right. They tried to erase me, but I ended up erasing them. I protected myself, just like you asked." Thank you so much for tuning in to this story. I really hope you enjoyed following Mara's journey as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below. so we can see how far our family reaches. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next video.